Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening.
Of course, Nigel would never have crossed Leslie's mind. In Leslie's opinion, the Manson family was highly affluent, and it was impossible for Nigel to have anything to do with Queenie. Despite the fact that he had bumped into Queenie and Nigel several times, Leslie refused to believe that Queenie had the charm to win the heart of a wealthy man like Nigel. With his family background and social status, Nigel could have all the women he wanted. However, Leslie thought that all men were the same as him. Once they were rich, they would only pick their dates in the upper-class circle and would not bat an eye on the girls in the lower-class circle. On the other hand, Maggie and Brandon exchanged surprised and confused glances. They wondered where Queenie found a boyfriend in such a short period of time and what she planned to do this time. Regardless, the members of the Payne family were displeased by Queenie, who brought her boyfriend over to join their dinner. She just broke off the engagement, yet she brought her boyfriend over. This was such a disrespectful act to Leslie. At this moment, the door was pushed open. Queenie stepped in first, and she held a man's arm. Soon, the mystery boyfriend was revealed before everyone's searching gaze. Bonnie couldn't help the sharp inhale before she hastily cut herself off, while Leslie's pupils dilated due to sheer shock. They looked at the man beside Queenie in utter disbelief. That man was indeed Nigel. Maggie and Brandon had never seen Nigel before. So, when they saw the young man Queenie was holding, they were momentarily too stunned for words. Who was he? His appearance was striking, and he carried the temperament and aura of a rich and refined gentleman. Bonnie lowered her head and tried to calm her raging emotions. It was really Nigel. Queenie was actually capable of asking Nigel to come and support her. After the shock, Leslie looked gloomy and irritated. Finally, he picked up the glass of water and took a sip to cover up his self-conscious state. Everyone, I would like you to meet my boyfriend, Nigel Manson. Hello. Nigel glanced at the people present and finally looked at the two vacant seats. Then, he chose the seat right next to Queenie. Maggie and Brandon greeted Nigel with a nod and a smile, yet the members of the Payne family looked indifferent and aloof. They didn't even try to be polite because they were flustered. Today was supposed to be the day Leslie called off the engagement, yet Queenie brought her boyfriend over and openly displayed their affection. Moreover, this young man had a better physique than Leslie, his face was far more stunning, and there was no doubt his temperament was better than Leslie's. It was absolute humiliation to them. Mr. Manson, I didn't expect you to attend as well. Bonnie immediately greeted Nigel with a charming smile. Queenie, hurry up and introduce this fine young man to us. Maggie was extremely curious. Previously, Queenie told her that she was working. So was Queenie working for him? Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Silverstein. My name is Nigel Manson. My family mainly works in the hospitality industry. Nigel humbly introduced himself with grace and elegance. Queenie asserted with a smile, his family business, Manson Group, has more than 1,700 five-star hotels around the world, with franchises all over the world, focusing on the top luxury hotels. He is the president of Manson Group and my boyfriend. Queenie's voice was crisper than that of a reporter. After she was done with her introductions, she hooked her arm around Nigel's and looked at him adoringly. Nigel also turned his head and looked at her with a gleam of warmth and affection. When everyone returned to their senses, just in time to hear Queenie's remarks, the members of the Payne family were shocked and aghast. Was the young man in front of them the heir of the Manson Group? Leslie felt even more humiliated this time. Queenie didn't pull her punches as she had succeeded in completely degrading him. So, Leslie, I'm really grateful for your decision to break off the engagement. I was so worried that my engagement would affect my relationship with Nigel. Queenie looked gratefully at Leslie. Then, she turned to Bonnie and beamed. Also, Bonnie, I want to thank you for being by Leslie's side. He won't be alone after we break off the engagement, and I'm delighted to have such a brilliant and excellent brother-in-law like Leslie. Queenie asserted her statement sincerely and earnestly. But, other than Maggie and Brandon, everyone else looked flustered and abashed, especially Bonnie. She laughed awkwardly. Queenie, what are you talking about? The things between Leslie and me are still up in the air. Leslie turned to look at Bonnie in bewilderment. He couldn't believe his ears when Bonnie denied the fact that they were dating. The members of the Payne family were disgruntled. It turned out that Queenie dumped Leslie because she had found a better man, yet she had the cheek to sit on her high horse and speak in a high and mighty manner. She even tricked Leslie into dating Bonnie, her arrogant and rude sister. She was so vicious and cunning. However, Ashton, Leslie's father, was a businessman through and through. So, when he heard about Nigel's identity, he instinctively wanted to leave a good impression. If he managed such a feat, he would have won a valuable connection, which would be a great advantage if there was an opportunity for collaboration in the future. Hello, Mr. Manson. My name is Ashton Payne. I run an equipment and machinery business. Here, a toast to you. Ashton immediately got up and raised his glass. Nigel glanced around the table. Unfortunately, he didn't have his own glass. Hence, when he saw Queenie's glass, he swiftly took it, stood up, raised it to Ashton, and took 2 sips. Queenie's heart skipped a beat at his actions. She had drunk the wine prior to his attendance. Could this be considered an indirect kiss? Brandon hurriedly urged the waiter to bring a wine glass and filled it with wine before handing it to Nigel. Maggie was overjoyed at this moment. Both her daughters were dating, and she was even more surprised that Queenie's boyfriend was from an extremely wealthy family. Queenie, why didn't you bring Nigel to our house before? Maggie murmured as her tone held its slight reproach. Although, to be fair, it was more than a little inappropriate to meet Nigel on such an occasion. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll bring him back for dinner someday. Queenie grinned. Bonnie glared at Queenie with envy and hatred, but when she looked at Nigel, she immediately turned gentle, shy, and timid. This was her usual tactic when she was with someone she admired. She would pretend to be a mild-mannered damsel in distress who needed protection. Leslie noticed that Bonnie's favorite dish, grilled shrimp, was placed far away from her. So, he took the initiative to place 2 shrimps on Bonnie's plate. Bonnie, here. Have some shrimps. Bonnie's pretty face was painted with annoyance as she glared at the shrimp on her plate with disgust. Don't you know that I'm allergic to shrimp? With that, she swept the shrimp aside and refused to pay attention to it. Leslie was shocked. Only a few days ago, Bonnie specially requested the grilled shrimp and told him it was delicious. Queenie watched their interaction in gleeful satisfaction. She secretly rejoiced when she saw Leslie being disliked and hated by Bonnie in various ways. There was no doubt in her heart that she genuinely thought that he deserved every bit of it. Bonnie, Leslie is being nice to you. Kira couldn't help but speak up for Leslie. I don't need anyone to be nice to me. Bonnie grumbled disrespectfully. The expressions of the members of the Payne family darkened at her words. Even Brandon reprimanded her less than stellar demeanor sternly. Bonnie, watch your words. Bonnie bit down on her lips and remained silent. At this moment, Nigel brought a piece of shrimp to Queenie. Do you like it? Yes. I like it very much. With that, Queenie didn't hesitate to bite down on the shrimp and enjoyed the shrimp with relish. One more, please. Nigel took another piece of shrimp, but instead of placing it on her plate, he fed it to her. Queenie was taken aback by his daring at first, but she quickly composed herself as she smiled, opened her mouth, and bit it. They openly displayed their affection in front of the people present. Bonnie could feel the resentment burning inside her. Queenie was doing this on purpose. Maggie and Brandon exchanged glances at the couple's behavior but said nothing in the end. In their minds, Queenie had always been carefree and forthright, so they did not find her current behavior odd or inappropriate at all. Leslie, right? Allow me to give you a toast. Nigel suddenly raised his glass to Leslie. Despite the annoyance and resentment bubbling in Leslie's veins, he had to force a smile and raise his glass reluctantly due to his fear of Nigel's wealth and affluent background. Mr. Manson, cheers. Before drinking this glass of wine, I want to thank you for giving Queenie to me, Nigel narrowed his eyes and said. Leslie sighed and lamented, well, I suppose we're not meant to be together. After Nigel took a sip of the wine, he extended his arm and wrapped it around Queenie's shoulders. Queenie stiffened in shock and looked up at Nigel beside her. Nigel looked back at her, and their eyes met. Then, finally, he called out her name softly, Queenie, I have something to tell you. Queenie blinked curiously, looking forward to what he would say to spice things up. Even Bonnie, who sat across from Nigel and Queenie, felt her heart leap to her throat when she heard Nigel's remark. Did he plan to confess to Queenie in front of her parents? Queenie, you may have been worthless to a man who didn't appreciate and cherish are priceless to me. So from now on, I'll care for you and love you for the rest of your life. Queenie was enjoying a morsel of food when she heard Nigel's statement. She was so dazed that she forgot to chew for a moment as she stared at Nigel, who was smiling so gently. Was he telling the truth, or making their bluff seem more believable? She must admit that Nigel was a natural-born actor if it was a bluff. Julian should even give his Best Actor award to Nigel. But it seemed impossible to be true. After all, she was the one who came up with the idea for him to be her pretend boyfriend. Unexpectedly, Nigel got into character so seriously that she didn't know how to follow up. However, never let it be said that Queenie didn't know how to ad-lib on the fly as she regained her composure and smiled sweetly. Really? Nigel flicked the tip of her nose lightly. Of course. Do you think I'm bluffing? Queenie chuckled and thought. Of course you are. This is all fake from the start. Still, everyone present felt that Nigel's confession was genuine. Nigel even mocked Leslie as the man who didn't appreciate Queenie and regarded her as worthless. Bonnie was so jealous that she was barely holding on to her rationality, and at the same time, she immediately came to a decisive conclusion. She must ruin Queenie's happiness and steal Nigel from her. Even if she couldn't win Nigel's heart in the end, she would definitely ruin Queenie's chances to be with a man like him. Oh. By the way, I broke off the engagement today, but it is also Bonnie's engagement day. So I won't steal the limelight. Dad, Mom, Mr. and Mrs. Payne, please host their engagement party. It seemed as if it finally occurred to Queenie that she was stealing the limelight. Maggie nodded when she heard her reminder and said, Right. We almost forgot about this. So, Bonnie and Leslie. Dad, Mom, you misunderstood. I have no intention of getting engaged to Leslie, Bonnie put her foot down. At the same time, she glared daggers at Queenie. It was only natural for Queenie to pick up on Bonnie's ire. Still, considering the situation, she merely smirked in amusement and turned her attention to Leslie. You must be responsible for my sister. Leslie was a bit chagrined. Bonnie had been so affectionate to him before this, but why did she suddenly change her mind and refuse to marry him? Were all his efforts in the past 6 months in vain? Queenie, stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Leslie and I are just friends. You've clearly misunderstood things, Bonnie continued on with her bald-faced lie. After she had set her sights on Nigel, there was no way she would ever admit to being involved with Leslie. Queenie knew Bonnie's character like the back of her hand. She knew Bonnie wanted to dump Leslie and steal Nigel. Nevertheless, she would not give her such a chance. "Bonnie, I'm your sister, so of course, I have to mind your business. Both of you have already done the deed, so it's only right for me to ensure he marries you," Queenie avowed firmly. Bonnie's frayed nerves snapped as her face flushed with anger. She was flustered as Queenie bluntly revealed that she had slept with Leslie in front of Nigel. She glanced at Nigel to observe his expression, but he was drinking water and didn't look like he was paying attention to the proceedings. "Don't be ridiculous. Nothing happened between us. That day, I was drunk and Leslie took care of me the whole night." "Nothing happened," Bonnie explained angrily, trying to alter the fact. Leslie was shocked when he heard Bonnie's denials. Yet, this was indeed an opportunity for him. To see an individual lying through her teeth and trying her best to get away with it. "Bonnie, how can you?" Leslie was heartbroken. "Leslie, hurry up and explain to Queenie what happened that day." "Nothing happened between us, right?" Bonnie's gaze was fixed on him. She was forcing him to take her side. Leslie finally accepted reality for what it was as he gulped down the wine and hissed, "Whatever." "Bonnie, what do you mean by that? You don't like Leslie? Do you know how much he spent on you in the past 6 months just to ask you out? How can you say such a thing now?" Kira roared, feeling upset on behalf of Leslie. Maggie and Brandon immediately defended Bonnie valiantly. "Bonnie is still young and immature. Please forgive her." Young? Immature? Leslie has spent millions on her. How are we going to settle this then? It would be an understatement to say that Kira could feel her temper rising with each question she spat. "Well, that's not on me. He spent that money willingly," Bonnie wasted no time in retorting huffily. After hearing this, Kira was enraged. "What? How dare you shirk things off, you brat?" Queenie was a little bewildered at this point because she didn't expect things to turn out like this. So, she got up and said, "Dad, Mom, why don't we go home first? Queenie, are you happy now?" Even at a moment like this, Bonnie didn't hesitate to push all the blame on Queenie. Her shameless remarks rendered Queenie speechless. Alas, Leslie genuinely loved Bonnie. Therefore, he turned to Kira and said, "Mom, please stop. This is between Bonnie and I. We'll solve the problem ourselves." An irritated Bonnie threw the cutlery down harshly, grabbed her handbag, and stormed off. As a result, Leslie hurried to catch up with her as he called out to her, "Bonnie." Maggie and Brandon felt a little embarrassed at this moment. Kira hissed in fury, "I don't think Leslie is lucky enough to marry Bonnie. There will be no further discussions about the matter. We're sorry. We're so sorry for Bonnie's attitude. We will knock some sense into her when we get home." "Dad, Mom, we'll take our leave first." With that, Queenie nudged Nigel and they made a hasty exit. Maggie and Brandon were left in the room, and they kept apologizing to the Payne family members. When they finally escaped from prying eyes in the restaurant corridor, Queenie patted her chest and was a little worried about her parents. "They won't fight, will they?" "No, but the two families are bound to fall out," Nigel concluded with a quirk of his brow. Queenie had underestimated Bonnie's shamelessness. How could Bonnie just leave and let their parents deal with her mess? Just as Nigel and Queenie walked to the restaurant entrance, they heard arguments outside the door and saw two figures clearly entangled in some sort of disagreement. Queenie took a closer look at the commotion and saw that the two figures were Bonnie and Leslie. Leslie was holding on to Bonnie, who was trying to leave, with all his might, and apologizing to her profusely as if it was entirely his fault. Meanwhile, Bonnie kept trying to tug her hands out of his grasp with an unhappy grimace as though it was disgusting for Leslie to even lay a single hand on her. Queenie watched the ruckus calmly by the side. She didn't expect to be able to see a hidden finale. Bonnie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. Please come back and get engaged with me. I love you. A surge of complicated emotions engulfed Leslie's heart at this moment. He wasn't really bothered by Bonnie wanting to end things with him, but the only way he could become Brandon's son-in-law was to marry Bonnie. He couldn't just stand back and watch as the Silverstein family's fortune slipped out of his hands. Therefore, he must grasp onto her with all his might and get engaged with her no matter how ridiculously humble he had to be right now. Let go. Leslie, I'm warning you. We're over. I'm done dating you. It's your business that you love me, but I don't love you anymore. Bonnie pulled her hand back while shouting those hurtful words. Nigel was not interested in this kind of drama, but he found that Queenie was watching them with a relish he couldn't understand. So, he forced himself to be patient as he accompanied her. Finally, Bonnie and Leslie came all the way to the main road. Bonnie wanted to cross the street to the opposite side of the shopping complex, but Leslie kept pulling her hand and refused to let go. Finally, having had enough of this farce, Bonnie showed incredible dexterity in high heels as she ran across the street at the last few seconds of the green light. Leslie, who didn't even notice that the green light had turned red, chased after Bonnie desperately. As soon as he took a step, a car that had been waiting for the light to turn green rushed over and knocked him down. Luckily, the driver hit on the brake in time, and the car stopped less than half a meter away from Leslie. Nevertheless, Leslie still fainted due to the fright of having such a close brush with death. Queenie, watching the drama, did not expect to witness a car accident. It didn't matter how much she despised Leslie, a life was at stake. Therefore, she darted forward and rushed to him, and Nigel, who was behind her, followed her. On the other hand, Bonnie, who was so intent on leaving Leslie to the dust, didn't look back at all when she disappeared into the crowd. Hence, she had no idea that Leslie almost lost his life in order to chase after her. Leslie. Queenie hurried over and squatted down to support Leslie's body. Then, the second before he lost consciousness, Leslie felt himself being held in a warm embrace. A pair of soft hands patted his face, and an anxious voice beckoned him to return to the land of the living. Leslie, wake up. Are you okay? Leslie finally regained consciousness but was still clearly panicking and in shock. The first thing he saw was Queenie's face. Then, all of a sudden, he hugged Queenie and cried like a child. Queenie. Queenie was startled by his reaction. Still, she figured that Leslie was merely terrified due to the rather morbid turn of events, so she gently patted his back and comforted him. All right, calm down. You're fine. At this moment, a hand suddenly clasped Leslie and rudely dragged him from the floor to the side of the road to sit. It was Nigel. After he removed Leslie from Queenie and forced him down, he even dusted his hands in disgust. Under the street lamp, they saw that Leslie's face and hands were scraped. He looked utterly wretched and miserable. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir. Are you okay? The female driver rushed over with her face pale in fright. Earlier, a man suddenly ran a red light and rushed out onto the street as soon as she shifted her gears to drive. Fortunately, she managed to hit the brakes in time, or she would have killed a pedestrian tonight. The terrified Leslie suddenly grabbed Queenie's hand tightly. Just now, when he was on the verge of death, it was Queenie's voice that snapped him out of his fear. Her voice was the most melodious and angelic voice he had ever heard. Only after the death ordeal was Leslie able to withdraw his feelings from Bonnie. He finally realized that Queenie was a kind and lovely person, and he regretted his previous behavior. Queenie, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can you please forgive me? Leslie was sobbing uncontrollably as he held Queenie's hand tightly. Queenie tried to pull her hand back to no avail as Leslie grabbed her hand with the desperation of a drowning man. All right, calm down. Do you want to go to the hospital? We'll take you to the hospital, Queenie asked. Yes. Please go to the hospital. I'll pay for your medical bills, the female driver urged in worry. Leslie was fine except for the shock and a few scrapes on his body. He waved his hand at the female driver and said, "Just go. You don't need to pay." Despite that, the female driver was still concerned. "You'd better go to the hospital to treat your wounds." Leslie sat on the side of the road decadently and said to the female driver, "I won't hold you accountable. Just go." The female driver had no choice but to leave because of his unwillingness to cooperate. Queenie glanced at Nigel before saying to Leslie, "We'll drive you to a nearby clinic to clean the wounds." "Okay." Leslie nodded docilely. Both families had yet to leave the restaurant, so they had no idea what was happening downstairs. The members of the Payne family demanded answers from Maggie and Brandon, while Maggie and Brandon kept apologizing to them for Bonnie's actions. Nigel drove over in order to attend the show, as it were. So, Queenie sat in the front passenger seat while Leslie got into the car. His legs were still jelly-like as he was still in shock. Nigel searched the navigation and drove to the nearby clinic. Leslie walked into the clinic, and Queenie followed him. The doctor prescribed some ointment for sterilization while the nurse bandaged Leslie's abrasions in quick and efficient movements. As the nurse cleaned and bandaged his wounds, Leslie looked at Queenie intensely. He could not express the gratitude and love in his heart through his gazes. Yet, at this moment, a firm thought emerged from the bottom of his heart. He had utterly fallen in love with Queenie after tonight's events. Nigel felt inexplicably displeased as he noticed Leslie's fiery and passionate gaze directed at Queenie. Thus, he clasped Queenie's forearm and said, "Let's go." "Don't." "Queenie, don't go," Leslie hurriedly called out. Queenie didn't even manage to say anything when a force pulled her halfway out of the clinic. "He won't die, so you don't need to pity him," Nigel muttered coldly. He opened the door of the front passenger seat and invited her to get in. Queenie blinked as she interpreted his remarks. He was right. As long as Leslie was alive and well, his family would not come after her family. But, because of Bonnie, the two families, who were firm allies, had turned into enemies. "Where are we going?" Queenie asked curiously. "Where do you want to go?" Queenie narrowed her eyes as she thought it over.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.